Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this. Share this video out to the world, and I thank you very much for your support. And welcome back to Phase 2 of Icons of Dragon Ball, where we celebrate 30 years of Dragon Ball being on television. It premiered February 26, 1986 in Japan, and since then has become an international worldwide phenomenon. And joining me on this edition, little bit more than just an icon on this one. If you watch television or play video games anywhere in the Western world, chances are you've heard his voice quite a few times. He voices Vegeta, Piccolo, Kuwabara, Zoro, Major Armstrong, and many more in his humongous resume. Please welcome Chris SABAT. How are you?
Hey, how you doing, dude?
I'm good,
Glad we can
man.
talk today. Wow, what a great introduction. I'm more than an icon. I'm like a super icon.
You're like
Is that what you?
a super god icon.
Wow, man, you are too kind. Well, thanks for having me on, man. This is awesome.
No, thank you for being on. I appreciate you taking time out of your day. You're always working, and I appreciate it. Now, the difference between you and a lot of other voice actors that I've noticed in just interviews I've seen from you is that you are genuinely enthusiastic about the work that you do. Like, you come off like a guy who really loves Dragon Ball and who really loves just doing this work. Like, it's almost as if it's work, but it's not work. It's more than work. Is that accurate?
It's accurate to some degree, but also, it is still work. I get a thrill out of it that's different, I think, than some of the other actors because I get to see everything come together on my end as the director. I get to see the scripts as soon as they come in. I get to see the video as soon as it comes in. I get to see all the actors when they come in. And so that's kind of a thrill for me because all of these guys are people that I'm friends with. So it's it's something where I get to kind of have a nice little reunion every time we get to work on more Dragon Ball. But don't get me wrong, it's hard as hell and it hurts. And there are so many days where I don't want to work on this show. Like it's torture sometimes.
Voice goes
Uh,
out.
yeah, the voice goes out. It's just really hard. Like you're screaming, you're yelling. Like Vegeta doesn't have subtlety really. He's just an angry guy all the time. And there are moments of the show, and I hate to start off like talk about Dragon Ball and how great it is by telling you something like this, but like there are moments where I don't like Piccolo's character, where he goes from being like this cool sort of sensei character to this kind of goofy, consistently shocked, weird kind of bug-eyed comic character, and I don't always like that. Uh, but in general, man, I do really like Dragon Ball, and I will say that all these new features and stuff like that, like Resurrection F, Battle of Gods and stuff, came up at just the perfect time because I was kind of at my wit's end. We had been repeating the same story over and over and over and over again. And it was so nice to finally get new material to cut our teeth on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's crazy because 2015, like everything I grew up on is back. Dragon Ball, Star Wars, Terminator, like all these franchises that a lot of us just loved when we were younger, just made this humongous comeback in 2015. The new Rocky movies, like fantastic, and Dragon
Yeah.
Ball was right in there.
Yeah, it's a year. Everything old is new again now, and I feel every time I go to conventions, I hear the same story, and it never gets, it never gets boring, it never gets tiresome. But it's amazing to me that everybody tells me the same story when they come up, and I'm sure other people who have worked on iconic shows like Star Wars and Star Trek, they hear a lot of the same thing too. But every kid that I meet or I say kid, they're in their freaking mid-20s now, but everyone I meet at conventions now tells me the same thing. Every day I ran home from school, I
Yeah.
watched Dragon Ball Z. I watched Dragon Ball Z every single day. I never missed an episode. Like it was crack to me when I was a kid. And I'm in some ways I'm kind of jealous of that because and when a lot of people over the years have asked me why Dragon Ball Z has been so popular, it's always difficult to answer that question because what is that magic that's attached to Dragon Ball that it's made it so successful everywhere it's been and been so beloved. Um, but one thing I do point out is that Dragon Ball was probably the first long-running serial television program. Like there are lots of shows that were long-running. Simpsons have been running forever. South Park has been running forever. But there, I want to believe, unless unless someone can prove me wrong, other than like the X-Files, there was really no show that was just a serial program on TV. Um, Nothing to that scale. And now it's very common. You've got Lost and 24 and Breaking Bad
Breaking Bad,
and like
Game of
Walking Dead,
Thrones.
everything that just has this long storyline. And I think that and I don't know if this type of programming is acceptable now because people grew up with that type of programming, with things like Dragon Ball and Pokemon, things like that. That had these long running storylines. So maybe that had something to do with it. It was something different. People, you know, some of the original movies in the cinemas, when motion pictures were first invented, were these weird little cliffhanger things. So that was already tested and true, but this was really the first time I think anything on such a massive scale uh, had been unleashed on the public, and people, especially kids, just ate it up.
It's just a perfect mix, man. You have fights, you have space, you have dinosaurs, you have wacky comedy. It's just I mean, it's not a perfect series as far as storytelling
No,
goes,
no, no.
but it's just got everything,
Of
right?
course, yeah, it's got a little bit of everything for everyone. And I used to joke with people back in the day when I was first working on the show, when anyone was asking me about Dragon Ball and why would anyone watch. I'm like, here's the deal: you may not like it, but I challenge anyone to watch, 8 episodes of that show and not want to watch the ninth episode. It's just human nature. You have to kind of like, it's human for you to want to know what's going to happen in the
Yes.
next episode. Like whether you and that Frieza saga really tests a human being's patience because it just goes on and on and on. And then once you get so far into it, you're like, I've got to see this through. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the magic of the show. I actually want to go back to that. I want to ask you about that. Before I do, I want to ask you real quick. I had done my homework on you. I've been following your career, for a while, and I found out that you never really wanted to be a voice actor. You wanted to be a DJ in radio, but then you did it, and it wasn't fun. Is that pretty much correct?
Yeah, in a way, it wasn't what I expected it to be. I grew up with this idea because, when I was a kid, I used to love listening to DJs on the radio, and it sounded so like
Me
spontaneous and
too.
fun and interesting. And and when I was growing up, I guess in the 70s and early 80s, it was like that. But without going into a long explanation of how the radio industry has changed, but basically in the mid 80s and early 90s, the radio has changed dramatically. Like it used to be, they had all these regulations where you could only own one radio station in a market. Like if you owned a radio station, you could only own one in Dallas. But that has since been deregulated, and now one giant company can own half of the radio stations or if not all the radio stations in a town,
Yeah.
and they can own that same radio station in every single town in the United States. So DJs went from like these personalities that were on the air and saying fun, spontaneous things to guys that were just sitting behind a microphone that were pre-recording all of their breaks and having to read liners off of these sheets that came directly from the company, and there was really nothing creative about it anymore. Um, but the only thing that I really got out of working in the radio business is that, aside of being a DJ, I was a production director for a while, and I found that I really loved producing commercials. It was the production side of things that I really enjoyed.
Behind the camera, right?
Yeah, yeah. Playing with sounds, playing with sound effects libraries, liners and spots and stuff, and all those things that make radio stations sound interesting. I found that was my jam, and I took my jam from my daughter, who said that to me this morning, who I thought was really funny. She goes, "These pancakes are my jam." Anyway, she's 4. so
Yes.
so yeah, it was a I think that's what I took away from it. And I realized that when I was a kid, all I would do is sit around playing with electronics and toys and microphones. I used to love to record things and record my own voice. And I realized that's the core of what I enjoy doing. And it's sort of what I'm still doing to this day.
So it's safe to say you enjoy that more than actually doing the voice acting.
Um, I I like the variety of everything I do. And I think if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't like just being a voice actor. And I know that sounds like a snarky, spoiled, rotten thing to say because being a voice actor is an amazing thing. But I don't know if I think my ADD would not allow me to do just one thing. Oddly enough, the voice acting work I do is fun, but I have a strange love of trailer voiceover. I have a strange
Oh
love
man.
uh, to just do like corporate industrial voiceover. There's something that's fun about making someone's really boring stuff sound interesting.
When Don LaFontaine passed, man, that hurt. I remember he did the promos for the Toonami original 3 Dragon Ball Z movies, and I was so that's the when I think of movie trailers, that's the guy who I think of.
Of course, that's what everybody thinks of. He defined that he defined that genre. And what's funny is I was in a studio watching him work one time. I was at a studio where he had gone to record some stuff. And it was only in listening to him in the studio that I finally realized kind of what his shtick was. And it's that a lot of people when they try and do a Don LaFontaine impression, they just try and make their voice as low as possible. And that's actually where a lot of people get the impression wrong. What I realized is that it wasn't as much like that his voice was low. It's just he had this method of singing through everything. Didn't matter what it was, a vowel or a consonant. He would rattle this resonance would like rip through his voice. He would almost sing. He could sing through a T or an R, and this stuff was he would. And what made his voice so interesting is that he could just cut through a mix. He could cut through audio so well. And that's what made Don LaFontaine so interesting to listen to. The other thing that's brilliant is that he parodied himself before he died. So that I don't know if you've noticed now, it's only been I'd say the past year or two that they're even starting to sneak voiceover into trailers again. But for a long time, once he died, nobody could actually do that trailer voice without it sounding like, a bad copy of him. So they just stopped doing it.
It's just from an era, a previous era that I have very fond memories of.
Yeah,
So let's go back to '98. Now,
sure.
the series blew up on Cartoon Network. Ocean Studios was the voice cast. People wanted to consume more Dragon Ball. Funimation, I guess, realized the show was a hit, and it was a hit on Cartoon Network. And I'm pretty sure what happened was they were told, "Listen, we need more episodes." The Goku arrives on Namek. That's it. We're back to Raditz again. Over and over and over again, we were all as fans we want to see more. Great cliffhanger. And from what I understand, I need you to kind of fill me in on this one. What I had read was that the Ocean cast was too expensive to fly in, so they got new voices. Is that correct? Is that what it was?
Well, actually, it's not. It's not exactly that. Um, but everything I say about the Ocean Cast, by the way, needs to be prefaced by the fact that those guys are mother effing amazing.
The
They are.
legends.
They are incredible. All of those guys are incredible. So everything I say about these guys is all from a business perspective. Now, granted, I wasn't an executive at Funimation. I was just I was just a voice director and an actor when they first hired me. So I didn't know a lot of what their business dealings were. But it's to my understanding, I do know these things, is that they weren't flying the ocean actors into the United States to record this. The producer, Barry Watson, was flying to Canada to record these episodes.
Really?
Um, and part of the problem they had is that while fun like Dragon Ball Z was showing like signs of being a success, it, being a success on television doesn't necessarily make you any money. Um, Being on television, especially for kids programming, is really more about like a 20-minute, 22-minute commercial for toys. So
Yeah.
unless you're able to sell merchandise, you're not really making money. In fact, you're losing money based on what the network will pay you for a show. So Funimation wasn't making any money really on Dragon Ball then. So they weren't able to pay these Canadian actors what they were really worth. And while they were still doing it, they were having a hard time keeping a consistent cast too, because when you don't pay someone enough to do something, they find other things more important. So they'd gone through 2 or 3 Gokus already, and they were just having a difficult time maintaining that cast and keeping it together. Um, I'm sure it also factored in that this American company didn't want to just have to fly to Canada for the rest of its existence to get its work done. They really wanted to see if they could bring that production to the United States, and even more specifically to Texas. So it was motivated by these producers saying, like, I don't want to fly every day of my life to Canada to get this work done. We need to see if we can do this here.
So even though you worked there, you still had to audition, right? Like everybody else.
Oh yeah, I got my first role with Funimation before I worked there. It was Yamcha in this little movie called Sleeping Princess and Devil's Castle. It was
Of
like a direct to
course.
VHS movie, and it was about a month or two later that they called me back in and said, "Hey, we really liked working with you on this movie. We're curious if you'd be interested in coming in to cast and help us cast and maybe direct these actors on this series." And I didn't know much about the series, and I didn't know much about anime at the time. I'd only watched a few of them, actually the only ones that you could even find in America at the time, like Ghost in the Shell and Akira
Akira.
and the Big Fist of the North Star. But it beat the heck out of whatever I was doing at the time, which I can barely remember what I was doing. Uh, so I agreed to come in house, and the first job was to find actors to work on Dragon Ball. And it was tricky because, as I said, Funimation didn't have a lot of money and they weren't paying people. I mean, it was embarrassing what they were paying actors
Didn't
back
you say
then.
it was 20 grand a year to ruin your voice? I remember you said that once.
Oh, that's what they paid me to be an in-house like director, but they didn't pay me for any other voices beyond that, which I think was part of their motivation, I'm sure, to cast me on lots of different things because they're thinking, well, I mean, we get Chris's voice for free, might as well just go ahead and have him do it. I don't think anyone knew that Dragon Ball Z would have such longevity and it'd come back again and again. There'd be so many video games. There wasn't that thought way back then. It was more of, we just need to get this done, and Chris happens to be working in house. Now, when it comes to Vegeta and Piccolo and Mr. Popo and Kami and the dragons and stuff like that, we all auditioned for that, and it was part of my job to find as many actors as possible. So we had this massive, massive casting call. Um, and the problem we ran into is that the agencies, the talent agencies in Dallas were thinking, we're not going to even send our people. We're not sending our actors out for this because it doesn't pay enough money, and so we're just going to sit this one out. So I had to go to universities and theater departments and local theaters and put an ad. I put ads in the paper for this giant audition that we were having for this national cartoon. And it was that ad that I think that a lot of the actors that we know now on Dragon Ball responded to. It was Sean Schimmel's wife, actually, at the time, found that ad and pointed it out. Uh, Sonny Strait saw that ad. There was just so many people that came into the audition because of that ad that I put in the entertainment paper at that time.
That's crazy.
We had this huge casting call, just like thousands of people, and I'd say that of all those people, especially since a lot of them weren't actors, they were just people off the street. We found maybe 11 people that were good, you know. And that's a sad reality, but it's true. Like there were about 11 people that seemed like they were kind of decent at this.
Well, and
And
they
so,
got better, I think, as time went by.
oh, sure, they did, and we added lots more people to the cast. But I think that explains why, like, I got cast as so many things because I was one of the only guys that had a lower voice, and I had a range because I have a lower voice. Um, and there were people like Sonny Strait that played Krillin, and his voice is just so. At the time, it just felt so recognizable. We couldn't put him on anything else. And Sean, you didn't want to put Goku's voice on a bunch of other things as well. It would only pollute kind of your impression of the main character. Uh, I auditioned for Vegeta, auditioned for Piccolo, and I auditioned for all of the roles I ended up getting. And it was the producers that came to me that reviewed all this stuff that said, I put everybody on unnamed tapes so it wouldn't kind of flavor their opinion as to whether I was it or not. And they would say, we like this guy for Vegeta. I'm like, well, that's me. They go, congratulations. They go, we like this guy for Piccolo. I go, that's me too. They go, congratulations again. And I'm sure in the back of their mind, they're like, let's use Chris as much as possible.
Well, it's funny because people think that some fans think that you selfishly cast yourself as all the cool characters, but I had known this too, that it just wouldn't make sense because of how much work goes into it. You wouldn't, it was something that one of their moves. I wanted to ask you, so they wanted you initially to try to sound like Brian Drummond and Scott McNeil. That's what they wanted, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Because they were, everybody who watched Dragon Ball back in those days probably remembers that fateful day that they turned on their TV after a long break to watch Dragon Ball again, and all of a sudden, all the voices were suddenly different.
I had the Ginyu Assault tape, so I got it ahead of time. And let me tell you something, getting that tape, that Ginyu Assault tape, was like Indiana Jones at the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark.
So you stole it from the store, like with one hand in a sandbag and the other, is that what you're saying?
From Suncoast, but they deserved it because they charged $25 a tape.
I hear you.
Back in the day. So you mentioned once, I was going to ask you about this. You said once that when you first showed up there, they handed you like a bag full of tapes of the Frieza saga.
Oh yeah.
In Japanese with no subs, or like was it in Spanish?
First they gave me all of the stuff that the Canadians had done. So it was everything they'd done up to the point that they were working on. So they gave me all of the Ocean dub stuff up through episode 68. So I was watching basically the English version of it. So they didn't have Japanese tapes of all of these episodes, and there were no subtitled fan subbed versions of them available. In fact, the only language I could hear if I listened to them, and I've said this on panels before, is the Spanish version.
Yeah.
So that's, if I referenced any audio at all, it would have to be the Spanish version. So
I had fan subs. If I had known you back then, I would let you borrow them.
Yeah. So I mean, you could say, like, I'm sure that there are plenty of people who believe that I probably selfishly cast myself and stuff. And honestly, if we'd had just oodles of amazing actors that we had auditioned, and I had cast myself as one of those things on top, as opposed to those other guys, I would feel pretty crappy about that. But really, it came down to, it being a new company. They weren't paying a lot of money, and there weren't a ton of actors that even qualified for this, and I was a pretty good mimic to try and mimic these Canadian cast members. What they didn't want were people tuning in after the break and finding out that the characters sounded dramatically different. They wanted them to sound as close to the Canadian versions as possible, which I agreed with, but only for a short period of time. I didn't want to continue doing a copy of somebody else's voice, which is why Vegeta's voice has changed over time.
Yeah, I always felt that Drummond's was a little more slimy, but I think yours was a little bit more regal. Like more like you make him sound more like a prince. In my opinion. Now, but you went back, if I remember correctly. Did you not go back and redub those for the Orange Bricks?
Yeah,
right?
We did. Yeah, we did. We went back and recorded them, and that was tricky too, because I wanted, we had to record them from the beginning, and then it had to kind of match up to where we started, which is us copying the Canadian cast again. So for those first original 68 episodes for the Orange Bricks, I had to go back and raise the voice up a little bit so it wouldn't be too shocking once it looped back around again.
Yeah, but once you went back and did season 1 and 2, everything was nice and everything was in order, I guess, right?
Yeah, everything felt natural, but I still had to raise the voice a little higher than I would have wanted. Although, in retrospect, I've seen comparisons between how Vegeta looks at the beginning of the series and how he looks at the end, and there's a massive physical change in Vegeta's look throughout the series, and it's not that long between the beginning and the end of the series, like, in terms of a timeline, and so he looks so different. And so I think the change in the voice is reflected in that as well.
Yeah, I think part of the reason too was that they had Minoru Maeda doing. He was the animation director, and then later on it was Tadayoshi Yamamura. So I think that's like maybe why he looks. But you're right, he looks older and stronger. I would say.
Yeah, he grew these testicles between his eyebrows. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed those, like when they do close-ups later on in the series, like the
Yes.
characters as they get stronger have like weird testicles between their eyebrows.
Yeah, I did notice that. A little jarring, but
Yeah.
what can you do? Yeah, once you've seen it, it can't be unseen.
No, sorry guys.
Yeah, well, so the series blows up, gets even bigger. You start doing the DBZ movies. More episodes come. 77 more episodes for season 4, and that's the TV season 4, not the home release season 4. This is the actual like seasons when they were on television. So you do all this. It's blowing up, just crazy. I wanted to ask you, did you at one point not like? I wanted to ask you because I had heard this that you didn't have when you guys were originally doing the series. You did not have the Japanese scripts from Toei. You had to base the translation from the Spanish scripts. Am I correct on that?
No, that's actually that's incorrect. We did have translations from Toei, but they weren't very good. So they were having to have them retranslated back in
Oh,
those
okay.
days. But they still didn't have fantastic translators until later on. Like Steve Simmons came around.
I was gonna bring him up.
He's a fantastic translator, and he really is kind of the the translated spirit of Dragon Ball in America. If there's any understanding of Dragon Ball, it's because of Steve. Um, and so the only time we use the Spanish is, I mean, we really didn't, is if we ever turned on the tapes and listened to the original language, it was in Spanish, it wasn't in Japanese. We didn't
Ren-
I
Renee
never heard what the
Garcia.
Japanese voices sounded like hardly until, I mean, I heard it every one, like I heard like a cassette of it at one point, but I really hadn't heard the Japanese voices until we started working on that first video game. That's
When
when I started really listening to the Japanese voices. It was like Budokai, the first Budokai game.
So it was just Renee Garcia then, and Drummond, I guess your previous, I don't know.
Right. I mean, and I really didn't listen to I'd say we probably listened to the Spanish maybe 10 times. We really just didn't reference it. And whenever we did turn it on, it was a little bit comical because it just sounded so strange to us. So it wasn't, yeah, I wasn't influenced by the Spanish dub in any sort of way.
Okay, good, because I wouldn't have cleared that up. So, let me ask you a question. How do you feel about dub changes? Because when you guys went back to do Kai, much better dub. I think everybody will agree to that. I saw you do an interview with Schemmel on YouTube about how this time we're going to do it different. You know, it was a different kind of mentality to keep it more towards the Japanese. But that original Z dub did have a number of dub changes, and I know some of them were like censorship changes, of course, deities and religious changes you had to change. You couldn't call Kami God. You had to call him Kami. That makes perfect sense. Did you feel that those changes came from, when you were there, from just the bad translations that just didn't make any sense?
Those changes did, some of them came from that, yes, but I'd say a majority of them came from the perception that people had of cartoons
Yep,
in the
I
late
knew it.
90s, you know what I mean? And
I knew it.
the guys who ran Funimation back in those days, they were just playing it safe. And they'd have to run their episodes through this company. And I wish I could remember the company's name. I remember we would get the scripts back and they would just be littered with red notes that said, this could possibly be offensive to this. The word scumbag actually refers to a condom that's filled with semen. You know what I mean? So don't use
Really?
that word. Yeah, add that
I
to your
never knew
vocabulary
that.
again. Um, you know, they just, and when we had to run these, we had to send these episodes out for television. They were running on, you know, not public television, but they were running on regular broadcast channels. And they have to go through a process called standards and practices. And those guys would literally go through, and I don't know who was on the committee, but I imagine it was like I NAACP leader, a nun, a priest, a rabbi,
Yeah.
an uptight mom, you name it. Anyone who could possibly be offended by anything was somehow on this committee. And they would go through and say, no, that's offensive, that's offensive, that's offensive, that's repeatable violence. You can't have that sort of blood. So a lot of those changes happened because of that. Um, and unfortunately, that behavior kind of bled into the culture of Funimation at that time. So a lot of the guys, even without it, even before it needed to be censored, they started pre-censoring it as it went along, and then it became part of the style of just like, well, let's just change this. So nobody's offended by it. I don't think we need to talk. Like I'm kind of annoyed by the way they handled Goku's transformations and people's transformations in Dragon Ball, which I only learned as we were going through and working with Kai again, and as I'd read the manga, did I have a better understanding of really what Akira Toriyama's intention was for Super Saiyan transformations. Funimation's writers took the route of, oh, you have to let go of your anger in order to ascend, but that's not even the case at all. Like, you usually have to become extremely angry.
Yeah.
And they tried to make Goku into this kind of altruistic hero who just wants to help people because he wants to help people, but that's not true either. Goku is actually a very selfish hero,
Yes. Very.
and he only helps people because, well, he doesn't want anyone to get hurt, and these are his friends, but he'll put his friends in tremendous danger just so that he can see a he'll put the whole world in entire danger just so he can see somebody fight at a stronger power level. Um, so there were a lot of problems we had with the original dub, and that was just pure ignorance. It was bad translations. It was just a time. It was also, we were rushing to get
Yeah.
it all on television back then, and they were just, making carte blanche decisions. I was making changes when I thought things would be funnier or more interesting. Um, cats love food. That phrase that I put in that one episode where Yamcha's talking with Poir, completely made that up. There was a lot of things that we thought would just be funny, and because to us, we were just working on a show, and our goal, which was mandated from the top at Funimation, was not to necessarily make a Japanese show. We were making an American show
Yeah.
for Americans, and that's what they wanted.
But with Kai, it was the opposite. I remember the interview. You said that with Kai, we're going to change everything and make it much closer to what the source material was.
Yes, we don't make any changes. We didn't make any changes in Kai unless it just didn't fit the mouth movements. If it was accurate to the translation, if it was accurate to the story, we kept it. And because I did like the idea of having a version of Dragon Ball, whether people liked the cast changes or not, or whether they liked the voices, or whether they liked the music. Um, at least there was a version of Dragon Ball that people could watch and know what the real story was and know the real intention of Dragon Ball. And I think it's just as fascinating and just as interesting as it was with all the hokey stuff that we added before, which when you take it out, you miss it. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of people that said, we got dogged so hard back in the early days for those dubs. Like, people who were, especially purists and anime fans, were like, why are you doing this to Dragon Ball? You're destroying Dragon Ball. And I'm like, this isn't my fault. This is just happening. Like, I'm just a guy who gets these scripts, and we're just trying to make it through them.
You're just coming to work.
Except, you know, people were so offended by it. But now, when we are actually making an attempt to, like, when we did make an attempt to make everything absolutely right, there's so many people are like, I just like the original. I wish the original was back. I want those stupid lines. Like, I like the, I like the stuff that was there before, and I completely understand.
Yeah, nostalgia is strong, man.
Yeah, there's a charm in there is a charm. Even there's some really awful acting and some terrible stuff in those Z episodes. Because remember, we did, as I'll say again, Funimation did not have enough money. So there were a lot of moments where we'd have to call in crowds of people, like Crowdwalla or something, and they wouldn't let me call in actors from, that were being paid. I had to use dudes from the office. So I'd have to get like some secretary and someone who worked in marketing and someone who was a graphic designer to kind of do all of the background sounds, and it was hard and it sucked.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine. It was probably a lot easier. I just remember in Z, like, your Piccolo was kind of like Gohan, and then in Z it was like Gohan. Like, it was almost you were using your real voice for Piccolo.
Yeah, I just was using a voice that didn't have to be as forced, because Piccolo is not
Yes.
Like, he's just not that forced of a character. When you're trying to make him into a zany cartoon, that works. But when he's just supposed to be this relaxed dude who would rather be hanging out in an ice cube and meditating, I just didn't want to have to force his voice as much as they did ask me to do in the beginning.
Now, I have a question about Battle of Gods that's kind of been racking my brain. In the dub, I remember there's a line that was not in the Japanese version, but there's something, it wasn't. Basically, there's a line where Whis talks about that Beerus told Frieza to destroy Planet Vegeta, and I remember that was not in the Japanese version of that film at all. But here's where it gets weird. When Dragon Ball Super was airing in Japan, they redid that arc and they actually put that back in. They yes, okay, so Beerus did tell Frieza to destroy Planet Vegeta. Was that line something that Toei had tipped you guys off on? Like, hey, this is where we're taking the story, even though it's not an R dub. There's a little secret there.
I don't. This is the first time hearing about this. Like, I've not heard anyone talk about this before because
I did 3 videos on it.
we did not. We did not make any changes to that. That was in the translation. That was in the line. That was absolutely in our. That was in the translation, and it was in our script. So there was no change to that at all. The only line I added to Battle of Gods that was not in the script is an offline that Bulma has when she has met Whis and Beerus, and she turns around and it's not up front, it's in the background. It's after she's met Whis and Beerus and in front of Vegeta, and she turns around to everyone and she goes, "Hey guys, look, Vegeta actually has friends." Which I thought was a really, we needed kind of something to fill that scene out, and I thought it was really funny. But other than that, we kept very close to the translation. The other part that boggled my mind, there were a couple of things that boggled my mind in the translation of Battle of Gods, and I was going back and forth on this. It's that when Pan in the original series, as in Battle of Gods, was talking about how there's another Saiyan, and they could do the.
You mean Videl, and she was pregnant with Pan.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Yes. My apologies. I was looking. I was actually looking at an image of Videl as I was talking. But Pan is. So there's Pan and there's Videl, and she's got something in her stomach, and she's telling everyone, well, it might not be. It might not be an actual person yet, but it is definitely a Saiyan, and in the translation, it said he multiple times.
That's right, because they didn't know.
But they didn't know, and I wasn't sure if that was just because Japanese use a he pronoun whenever, referring to it when they don't know, or they just, it's just polite to say it's going to be a boy, because if it's a girl, they'll kill themselves or something.
Oh, boy.
I have no idea. But I went back and forth trying to decide whether I should just put he or she in that moment, and I stuck with he because it was in the translation, and I thought, who knows? I mean, this is a new universe. This could actually not be Pan in her stomach. This could be something else.
The long lost baby or something.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to be the one to mess that up. I was going to stick with what the translation said.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
And I verified it, so go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, did you come up with that all hail Vegeta, Prince of Nothing line? Because that was my favorite line of Resurrection F.
Oh, no, that was definitely written by, I'm going to say it was either written by Michael Tatum, or it was written by Jared Hedges, or was changed or adapted by John Bergmeyer. I don't know who was responsible for physically writing that line, but I loved it.
I love that line. Absolutely. I don't care if it's not in the Japanese version. I love that line.
If you want to talk about translations in those movies and what I wasn't sure they were referring to, and I had no way of finding out, it's when Whis and Beerus are constantly talking about Vegeta and Goku, and if they would, quote, work together.
Yeah.
And they kept referring to, if they would join forces or work together, and I couldn't quite tell if they were hinting at fusion or cooperation. That's something I still don't know the answer to yet. So.
We might get that answer soon. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
There's still stuff coming out. So, real quick. So, Funimation, I want to go back, and then we'll go back to this. I'm curious about this, but Funimation started, Dragon Ball blew up. Funimation started to dub other anime. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, Fruits Baskets was second, then Blue Gender, then Yu Yu Hakusho. Is that right?
Actually, I think it went. No, actually, we let me double check my memory here. I think the first thing we did after Dragon Ball was I don't think it was Blue Gender. I'm pretty
Fruits
sure
Basket?
I don't think it was Fruits Basket. Sorry, I believe we went straight into Yu Yu Hakusho, and then after Yu Yu Hakusho came Fruits Basket.
So what was so different between recording Dragon Ball and Yu Yu Hakusho? Like, what are your memories of the difference between those two?
Well, the biggest difference is that I didn't direct it, and I wasn't like a huge part of the beginning of it. I remember Justin Cook and Barry Watson were really kind of paving the way on that dub, and Barry Watson, who had kind of taken a step away for a while, as we were continuing Dragon Ball, he really wasn't doing a whole lot of work on it. Decided to really step back in and assert kind of some dominance, um, and help with the casting and stuff like that.
I thought that was a fantastic dub.
It
I mean,
was. Justin Cook did an amazing job on that dub. And it was actually so Yu Yu Hakusho was handled in a very similar way to Dragon Ball. We didn't have all the elements and things like that. That we didn't have a lot of the background music or sound effects as we were recording it. It was sort of recorded dry, just like we did Dragon Ball. And right after Yu Yu Hakusho, I actually hadn't even finished. I started working on Blue Gender, and that was the first dub that Funimation did that's done similar to the way we do dubs today, which is we get the sound effects track and the music track and the Japanese audio. Then we get to reference every single line in Japanese first. That was the first. I insisted on doing it that way, and Funimation didn't seem to care because they didn't seem to care about Blue Gender. They were like, whatever. That's we don't think that show's going to sell anyway or something. I have no idea, but they let me do whatever I want, and so that was the first time we ever really listened hard to the Japanese and try and kind of mimic the style that they. It was the first one that I really tried to make sound as close to the Japanese as possible. And whether it did or not is up in the air, but it definitely started a trend towards we're going to listen to the Japanese first and reference that, and then we'll come in and do our own. But before, it was just you saw the line in the script, they pressed beeps, and then you kind of went with it. Then you had no idea what was happening in the music or sound effects or what the Japanese were doing.
it's crazy, man, because you were there from literally like the bottom to the top as far as like the rise of Funimation. They were doing Chuck E. Cheese and stuff like that,
Yeah.
in like 95. And then now they are the probably the largest anime company ever. I've had friends tell me that, and I haven't seen it all the way through yet, but I have been told from experts that Full Metal Alchemist is the greatest dub of all time. That's what I was told.
Well, I could actually agree with you on that. It's an outstanding dub. It was just all of the things kind of came together on that dub. Uh, it was just a phenomenal cast, and it just had beautiful music, and I think it was definitely an amazing dub. I think it was also just an amazing show too. Just everything came together at that moment to just form something great. And Full Metal Alchemist, I agree, is I'd still say to this day one of the best dubs. Um, I think there actually have been some better dubs since then, but as far as an entire long running huge series is concerned, it's probably one of the best.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I want to ask you this before we get out of here. In retrospect, I had more questions, but we'll save them for another time.
Well,
This
we can do a part two to this if you want to. I'd be more than happy to sit down with you again. You actually know what you're talking about, and you're very interesting. So I would talk to you any day of the week.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I promise. Well, to wrap up the Dragon Ball conversation, I wanted to ask you, and I don't know your insight from being on the inside. Dragon Ball Z, specifically Z, had a number of re-releases, home video wise, replacement scores, and it's funny because a lot of the fans of like that era are craving for this replacement score to come back, and it's like replacement scores for anime is a very 90s thing that's probably not coming back. I think you would probably agree with me on that in a sense, but they just love it. But my question is, why was Dragon Ball Z treated so differently by Funimation than, Yu Yu Hakusho, Fruits Baskets, in the sense that they always were pumping out more DVDs and they replaced the score. Then for Kai they didn't. Like it's almost like they continued to always work on it. Was it just because it was like the launch pad?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, for lack of a better word, it's just a massive like cash producing machine. Like it just kept people kept buying it. I mean, to this day, I still think that Dragon Ball makes up a large portion of Funimation's kind of assets and things like that. People still love Dragon Ball and they still buy it. So it is their cornerstone property. As for rescoring it, I can tell you a little bit of information about that. I think part of why they rescored it is that again we weren't getting really great elements in from Japan. They weren't sounding very good. And if you've listened to the Japanese score before, I don't know how much noise correction they did on it, but in general, the Japanese score that we got sounded mostly like this.
Wow.
It was just like this horrible kind of noise floor that wasn't tolerable to American audiences. Also, Dragon Ball Z had because Funimation had taken a different approach to writing it. I'm sure people have noticed when they watch the Japanese, there's a lot of silence. There's a lot of staring people down for long periods of time, like an old samurai movie.
Yeah.
But I guess they thought that was going to hurt Americans' feelings if people just didn't talk. They just needed something wall to wall. So they rewrote the dialogue so people were talking constantly. When their back was turned and they weren't talking in the Japanese, they would keep talking in the English version. And so that wouldn't really match the score, which was just this kind of long, drony, slow passages. They wanted something that was more of an action show. Also, just, and I don't know how much of this, it's been a long time, so I don't think it really matters, but part of why I think they also wanted to score it was because they also retained the
money,
the licensing rights for the music at that time, and I think that's part of why they used Faulkner's music to begin with. And the reason why they don't now is I think the materials are coming in better shape, and I think that people are more understanding of the listening to soundtracks from different countries. I think that the soundtracks have gotten better. I did love the soundtrack for Kai until it changed, and then we found out it was all
Yamamoto
plagiarized.
Yeah.
I loved that music so much, and
Me
it was
too.
a shame that it had to go. And I'm not necessarily opposed to, if we're working hypothetically, or if we're working on Super, I wouldn't be opposed to rescoring that to some degree too, because I think Americans have a different sensibility for where music is placed than Japanese people do. I think Americans put music and sound effects in different places than Japanese people do. There's moments if you've watched much anime, there'll be moments that are in complete silence in anime where that would be just a fever pitch of music and sound in an English version. So I wouldn't be 100% opposed to changing it. But then again, we've been on such a trend of honoring what the Japanese give us that I don't know if it would happen.
Yeah, it's just a different era. I mean, I just remember the 90s, almost every anime had like Disturbed. And I remember you guys.
Yeah.
Totally different era. Well, thank you for being on. Before we get out of here, I was going to plug your Twitter, Chris24_Sabbat. But is there anything else you want to plug or anything you want to give out there to the Dragon Ball fan base, or anything you want to promote, or anything you have to say to them?
No, I don't. I've seen all you guys at conventions. I don't need to say anything else. I'm kidding. There's not really a whole lot I need to promote right now. I always feel weird doing that anyway. So, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of each other over the next several years, because it looks like Dragon Ball Z is not stopping. So I just appreciate everybody who's still watching the show and loves it so much. I appreciate all the people that I meet at conventions that tell me their stories, and I appreciate all the people who understand how difficult it was to make this show, and still is to make this show. So I guess I'll be seeing you all around. Thank you for having me on, bro.
No, anytime, man. Thank you. And I would love to talk to you again. One last thing I will say is that cross our fingers that Dragon Ball Super eventually you guys get it. Cross our fingers. Okay, that's all I'm gonna say.
Sure.
Right. When Bulma got slapped in the Super version, Ryo Horikawa did this incredible performance where he went or something, right? Where it was like this squeal of like pain and anger. I really really am curious about how you would, whenever, I got fingers crossed, you guys got your hands on this, how you would do that version of that scream, because it was just so much pain and yet so much like anger at the same time. I'm just really excited about when and if that happens.
I'll be honest, I have not seen all the episodes of Super just yet. I've been kind of saving those for when we actually get the proper translations and the proper video. Um, Plus, I just don't like. I'm bad at watching things in a serial fashion. I like to plow right through them and binge on them. So I haven't seen how he's handled that yet in Super, but I look forward to it.
I look forward to hearing you hopefully knock it out of the park. But
thanks, dude.
Hey, man, thank you, and hey, thanks everybody for checking out Icons, and we'll catch you down the road.